Okay, so this is going to be the first sort of on-the-road recording. I'm in Chicago at the American Philosophical Association meeting, and I'm staying with my colleague Sam Rocha at the, I think it's the Knickerbocker Millennium Hotel, right around the corner. No, I guess so. We're right around the corner from the Miracle Mile in Chicago. And so there's some background music. I'm in the mezzanine of the hotel lobby recording this because, well, that's where I am. So yesterday, I concluded the meditation with, and the long commentary with a quotation from Heidegger, which was an important quotation for this work, and that was hermeneutics is destruction. And it was, in some respects, unexpected quotation. It came out of the paragraph that ended, the releasement of the will, the silencing of the juridical voice is the leap of trust we make into the mystery of our relation with being. Learning unfolds in this leap. In learning, we embrace the mystery of the emptiness and watch the dignified calm of our temples of certainty are deconstructed. And so this was playing on the meditation that I wrote 2 days ago, where I was sort of making a distinction between the understanding that I have with relationship to language as against a more rigid or limited idea of dialogue. So the notion of dialogue that I'm working with, in the poetic sense of dialogue, was contrasted with this notion of one that I argued was trying to build up what I call the temple of certainty. So within that structure, if you will, there's a certain safety. And later on in the meditations in this work, I will talk about moving outside of the domestic halls, I call them, of education, and into the wild or into the open region. And they're sort of playing with an important piece that will I'll engage with, and I'll be taking up, which is Heidegger's A Conversation Along a Country Path, sort of sojourn away from the confines of the familiar and what I call the domestic or domesticated space of education. And so talking about these temples of certainty or being deconstructed is to sort of refer to this, what I call the domestic sphere of education. And so what brings it about, the destruction or deconstruction, or even just the mapping of a space that will allow us to move out. That's the language I'm using more often today, which is the idea of being able to identify the threshold and the movement out of this space, the confines of domesticated education. So what enables us to do this is hermeneutics, hermeneutical phenomenology, or hermeneutics. Now, it's interesting because I am here with Sam, and perhaps I'll have him jump in on a conversation that I'll post as an addition to this meditation. But two things came up in our lunch today as we were talking. One of them was this distinction between hermeneutics and phenomenology, as opposed to talking about a hermeneutical phenomenology. And the difference here, and I think what I'm trying to do, what I do in this writing, is a kind of hermeneutical phenomenology. A hermeneutical phenomenology is offering up descriptions that are sort of consciously aware that the descriptions that are being offered are in addition to the phenomena that's being described, right? And so there's the excess is being described insofar as something is being offered as a description, or a description is being offered. So the offering of the description is, in a way, an account of the excess, right? So what remains, or what is in addition to the phenomena, right? So there is the phenomena, there is the thing itself, and then there's the description of it. And so the description is the excess, and in that sense, it's hermeneutics, right? another way of talking about hermeneutics is to talk about hermeneutics as interpretation. And in this case, the description takes on such a poetic quality and becomes so poetic or so close to poetry, if you will, that it becomes the thing itself. So it's a kind of a replacement rather than a description. And so that's an interesting distinction to make. That so when Heidegger says hermeneutics is destruction, what he's really referring to is the destruction of a metaphysical system. That is to say, a closed system of thinking that, in a way, is akin to, but on the other side of a hermeneutics of interpretation, where the system is really replacing the world itself. The system becomes a philosophical system that stands in for or in place of being, right? And so what I'm trying to do is to offer an account of being, insofar as being is offering something to think about. And insofar as it does that, it takes me to the next idea that I talked about with Sam, which was the idea of saturation, the theme of saturation. That is to say that being and its offering its access is sort of saturated, right? And so it's spilling over, if you will, into our and towards us. And so we're sort of taking it up, and the way we take it up, that which is exceeding, is through language. And I found that a very helpful conversation because, as I go through these meditations and I look at the final product years later, which is Being and Learning, part of the realization is that there was little editing done on the work, the initial work. I mean, there was some correction of typos, there was some editing of some of the material, but there wasn't a lot of editing going on. As I'm reading them, I was saying this to Sam, there's a sense in which there could have been some editing, there could have been some cutting back, particularly of these what I called yesterday these sort of like paragraphs that are repeated, these sentences that sound almost as if they were verbatim repeated. The formation of what I call the gems within the meditations. That is to say, the repeated condensed paragraphs or sentences that keep getting pushed down, so to speak, under the pressure of the meditations, to the point where it's almost like the pressure that condenses and produces gems, right? That sort of to think about that. So it's a crystallization process, if you will. Part of me, as I read this work, thinks, well, some of that material could have been cut out. And when as I read through it, I think about this. But in talking to Sam about this concept of saturation, was very helpful because I think that's part of what this work is about. Part of the way I talk about it too. It's putting out as much as possible to the point where it's just saturated. It's just so much. It's so full. And then it's just sort of left in that state. Now that's not to say that's the only way that we should be doing the work, the only kind of approach I take, although I tend to write in a very dense way in general. But it certainly is the form that this project took, and I think that saturation might be one sort of interesting way of talking about the writing and the piece as a whole. Now, on that note, as I get to PPM number 15, that was originally written February the 27th, 2004. It's an example of a shorter meditation. So why don't I pick it up on that? The turning around, the adjustment, tuning toward attunement, toward the condition of learning, constitutes a relocation or repositioning. Our repose is the result of our being reposed. In this sense, we are reposed by the tidings of our relation with being. But to be reposed is to be posed again. And here we encounter again how the news of this relationship turns us, and in relocating our interests and attention, reforms us. The first questions have the effect of reposing us, as in making us questions. To be reposed, then, is to be posed again, to be questioned or examined. Our posture or pose, our comportment or attitude in learning, is one of being under examination. We become the question in learning, and we place our confidence in the relationship in which we are questioned. This is why the comportment of learning, as Gelassenheit, is described as the willing of non-willing. In the way we pose for a photograph and are placed in the right position to be captured, learning is the letting be of unconcealment. Being shines through the first questions, which capture us in the way the photograph captures us in the right posture. Later, when the image has been developed, we examine the photograph. What does the image say? How do we appear? What shines forth with this photo? Photo, borrowed from the Greek light. The first questions capture us and throw us back on ourselves, but not in the manner of introspection. In throwing us back on ourselves, we are turned toward our being in the world, our fundamental relational existence, as beings existing in relations with others. The will not to well is the repose of being in relation with other beings. Being captured by the tide, we are caught within the inflow and outflow of beings' processual unfolding, in appearing, withholding, presencing, absencing, unconcealment, concealment. The absence, concealment, is heard in the tidings. But how do we hear that which is absent or concealed? Exploring this question returns us again to the saying of nothing, wu yi wu, and our encounter with nothing, emptiness, and su. We have said that learning is the leap into the mystery of su, a cheerful enduring of this reposing, where we are moved, tossed about, and abide with an unstable location. We repose in the releasement of judgment and will, like Socrates, place ourselves in the draft, the current. But now we want to explore further why the appearance of the mystery in the said nothing is heard as possibility. If we return to Heidegger's essay, What is Metaphysics?, we take notice when he writes, Dasein means being held out into the nothing. Holding itself out into the nothing, Dasein is in each case already beyond beings as a whole. This being beyond beings we call transcendence. If, in the ground of its essence, Dasein were not transcending, which now means, were not in advance of holding itself out into the nothing, then it would never be related to beings, nor even to itself. Without the original revelation of the nothing, no selfhood, no freedom. And that's how I end it. Now, this is interesting because I recall that if you look at this, the page ends sort of halfway through. It's one of the few places where the page is sort of cut off midway. And there's just sort of extra sentence that says, is not yet. The terms nothing are conjuring, conjuring, conjure, contre-jour. So they'll play on conjuring, as in the magical speech, conjuring, conjure, and contre-jure. Which brings me back to one of the things that really stands out in this particular meditation is the play on repositioning, so being relocated, so the turning as being relocated or turned around as a repositioning, and then playing with the word repositioning as repose. Now repose means, to say repose is to be sort of sitting calmly, which is the result of the silencing of the juridical voice, right? So I talked about the calm silence that is the result or the effect of the encounter with the nothing, right? So, or what I've described as being emptied, right? So being emptied or having the juridical voice silenced, one is placed into the calm repose of silence. So being repositioning into repose. So our repose is the result of our being, and then I write re-posed. And here then, playing on the word posing, as in posing a question. So being reposed, repositioned, posed to reposed, means to be questioned again. So that was a nice play on that idea that we are the tidings that we receive, that's playing now for days now with this notion of heeding the thoughtful word, the tidings of the thoughtful word, reposes us. That means to say we become questioners. So we're reposed, that is to say we are posed again, which is both in terms of the physical sense of being moved, but also in the sense of being questioned. And that's why it turns us into questions. And this is an important point, right? Because in making the statement that we are reposed, or we are made into questions, or we become questions to ourselves, is to speak to the modality of learning, right? So at this point, then I can make the claim that the fundamental relationship between being and learning is sort of based upon this becoming a question, right? Which is a way of talking about being opened, staying open, being open-minded, listening, silencing the judgmental voice, silencing the juridical voice, being phenomenological, placing oneself in a receptive and a perceptive modality. I also talked about posing as being positioned for a photograph where we could be captured. And I think that at that point I was probably trying to play on this idea of being caught by the tide and being captured, in the sense of being captured as in being photographed, in the sense that the self is caught or captured. And so, in this sense, how do we appear? What shines forth? Again, playing with the sort of roots of phenomenology, meaning phenomena, which is shining forth or appearing, to be captured in an analog sense of photography, is to have the light caught, right? So our image, the light that shines on us, is caught, and photo, the roots of that being the Greek word for light. So I mean, I thought it was it appeared on paper as if it was a quote unquote shorter meditation, and it was. It's only 2 paragraphs, but some new ideas put forth there, and particularly I thought was sort of like the playing with this notion of being positioned, being turned around, and being posed again. I think that was my sort of favorite moment in that meditation, is this notion of being reposed. So, from the mezzanine of the lobby of the Millennium Knickerbocker, I believe that's where we are, the Knickerbocker Millennium Hotel. You should probably know where I am. I know I'm in Chicago for the American Philosophical Association meeting, 2014 Central Division meeting. That's going to do it. And as I said, perhaps I'll have a follow-up with my colleague Sam Proja I'm here with. So hopefully it all was recorded, and that the music that was in the background didn't overwhelm the reading of the piece. But so it is. When I originally wrote these meditations, I would write them every day from wherever I was. And in the same spirit of that, I'm reading them again every day wherever I happen to be. And so I happen to be here in Chicago in a hotel on this day, February the 27th, 2014.